Good morning, everyone. My name is Fezile, as Ashanti has introduced me. I am the founder of and CEO of Green Scooter, which is Africa's first all-electric vehicle and e-hailing platform. So what I'm going to talk about is electric urban mobility and how, the noise pollution that we endure on a daily basis because of the loud noise that comes from these amazing engines, which are not so amazing. And as well, once we start implementing electric mobility into our communities, so starting with your small urban, peri-urban areas and into the greater environment, we'll eventually find ourselves in a very peaceful place. You won't be like sitting in your car and hearing someone roar past you. So let's quickly imagine electric urban mobility. We can give you a transportation system that doesn't need charging. It consists of, energy, autonomous, free-floating ZB pods, or the shareability, of our ZB pods. We can deliver a big fleet into any city, and you never have to think about parking or charging them. And they're also, semi-autonomous. I wish I could have shown you one, but we don't have our vehicle here today. Our autonomous pods will eventually start replacing themselves, and they'd arrange themselves in the most optimized way in relation to each other. The solar panels on our ZB pods, for instance, will be totally disconnected off the grid, and you'd power them just from using the sun. And then on top of that, we can make this happen. The unfortunate part is that what is the actual missing link? Could we really provide this? And the answer is both yes and no. The technology is super exciting. We do think of this that is possible in the future, but the missing link is needed now. Part of why I'm doing what I'm doing with the electric mobility is that it's actually inspired by the Jetsons. I grew up being a fan of the Jetsons. It's a 1960s cartoon which literally gave us the future as we see it today. It's great technology, but obviously there's still a missing link as to how do we get there, especially if you look at South Africa or Africa as an emerging economy. So the future may be interesting, and I personally believe that we'll be able to achieve both flying robot taxis and free-floating and completely energy-autonomous city pods. But until then, we have to work with what we have and have correct size mobility for the transport mission. We can't sit around and do nothing while we wait for these super future technologies, as you can see right there, the Jetsons family, that we want so much to come true, except for the flying robot taxis. As I do think lifting batteries into the sky, if you look at the laws of physics, it's not really possible right now. Then there's the problem. The problem is congestion. A lot of people think that if we were to go electric, we'd actually get rid of congestion. We won't. So now, with the problem, I prefer looking at it within the South African context. So South Africa lacks a coherent policy framework that will mitigate the transition needed to migrate its current transport system from internal combustion engine culture to electric vehicle culture. South Africa as well has a very limited public transport system. No priority is being given on electric vehicles, as the infrastructure for EVs does not exist. And obviously we need to work on it. Conventional transport in South Africa as well, as we know it, it's generally expensive, unsafe, unfriendly to the environment. So again, what is that missing link? So I took this extract from a reading that I did some time ago. I just forgot who the author was. But they tackled one of the most important things, which is opportunity and the policy framework. So as you read there, the opportunity exists to develop a proactive policy framework that would shape and drive a transition for the benefit of all South Africans in a balanced manner. The opportunity, again, needs action now. Again, we go back to what is that missing link. The missing link is mini mobility, using our ZB pods, for instance, and any other manufacturer that exists. So it's a term. What does mini mobility mean? Is that it's a term that could describe as the operative space between cars and micro mobility. It uses a quarter of the space needed from regular cars, and an energy efficiency that is 5 times faster, actually 5 times better. Basically, taking the already existing transport service model from big Asian cities, for example, and apply a new improved technology on it in order to deal with the emissions, but still give the sufficient from all four elements. So there's something that I also came to discover as I did my research last year, which is something called transportation as a service, which is a convergence of different technologies. So for us, if you look at what we're doing as Green Scooter, we're looking at clean energy, we're looking at business model innovation, and we're also looking at what electric mobility. So a lot of applications that I feel, probably a lot of other people feel as well, is that we need to start converging technologies and stop trying to operate things in silos. Okay. So mini mobility, as well further explained, is that transportation of today's cities has to be combined through different service providers working together to optimize routes for the stream of goods, people going around the city or network. Mini mobility solutions is perfect for micro hub models in the city network, whether it's people or goods that needs protection from the elements when going from a couple of kilometers to 15 kilometers on an average trip. There's no such a thing as one solution to rule them all. There has to be a different solution depending on the particular journey. The ultimate objective is a seamless system that end users, the humans living in the city, should not even notice. There's just different things that move. There's different things that move around, and there's stuff, and are part of this beautiful network that is linked to our everyday lives. Mini mobility solutions are the missing links in the transportation chain, connecting and complementing bicycles and micromobility with larger vans, trains, buses, or trucks. This is something that I call a feeder system. As much as we have, a transportation system that can take you wherever you want to, we also need a first mile, last mile experience, which obviously, again, it's something that people have not really considered. Using not that much energy at all, as the size of vehicles is small and the right design, they become extremely lightweight. This will give all people access to efficient mobility solutions that takes them or their stuff from where they are to where they want to go. And in this context, the vehicles for themselves will decrease significantly. So here's another buzzword within the electric vehicle industry is obviously autonomy. Autonomy will also become its own service, right? So when autonomy becomes its own service, what does it mean? It means that you don't actually have to be an Uber driver physically, because why? You can literally just hail the ride from your phone and then send it to someone to get them picked up and then drop them off. So obviously there's another discussion within that, which is obviously the cost of ownership, or the real reason to actually whether own a vehicle or not. What do we then do? So with that, then there's electric vehicles and their disruption. What is it? If we already know that electric motors are five times more energy efficient, why aren't we actually investing more in them? The electric motor is 90 to 95% more efficient, meaning 95% of the energy turns to reusable energy. Electric vehicles are also cheaper to charge, the fuel or to charge or fuel, with consumers estimated to use only about 10.4% of what they use on petrol consumption over a 10-year period. The maintenance of gasoline cars is 10 times more expensive than an electric vehicle, which has obviously over 25 moving parts, than an EV has obviously less than 20 moving parts. At the present moment, EVs are slightly more expensive because of not being fully accepted by the market. But in the long term, EVs are cheaper to own as you spend most vehicle expenses on tires and less on service. And exactly, that's another disruption that's going to unfold with electric vehicles. Is then what's going to happen to insurance companies? Because look, to my understanding, especially when we look at car accidents, the reason why we have insurance is that it's not if it happens, it's when it happens, right? So you have an autonomous vehicle, which hopefully is a level 5. You don't need to be, there's no steering wheel inside. And it literally communicates with all other vehicles within its environment, meaning that there's less chances of there being a car accident. Because the term car accident came from two people who literally managed to crash into each other in a small town in America. So eventually, what's going to happen to those industries if there's no more car accidents because vehicles are communicating to one another? Especially now with guys as well who own small repair shops in every single corner, what's going to happen to those companies as well? Because remember, with EVs, less is more, right? Then there's the 96% versus the 4%. South Africans, on average, spend about 42,000 Rand per annum on their vehicle, which they use 4% of the time, which is a convenient waste. If your car parks 96% of the time, the companies keep spending millions on building, and there's already companies that are spending millions and billions on building more parking space. What is the point of this in the future? What's going to happen to it? Because eventually you're going to find yourself in a situation where, okay, great, I need a passive income. On top of needing a passive income, your vehicle is out there working for you while you're working. What's going to happen to the existing parking space that is there? Another future problem to explore, like I said, with transportation as a service, is going to be with vehicle ownership, large car parks, insurance companies, and newer forms of passive income. So, what more do we need to create? What more do we need to create this need for electric urban mobility and increase the demand for electric vehicles in South Africa? And my thing is that we need to set new objectives. As much as we have the GTS 2050 and obviously a lot of people trying to follow with what's happening in Europe, we need to localize it. So the future of SA's electric urban mobility has four main objectives to tackle. And they are, number one, is to understand the potential for electric urban mobility by 2050, aligning with the GTS, and probably re-engineering that document as well so that it can actually be implementable. Two is to provide stakeholder-specific methods, tools, and strategies to increase demand of zero emissions and urban mobility. Three, create stakeholder-specific roadmaps to achieve zero emissions urban mobility vision. And lastly is to initiate and strengthen existing international collective action as a basis for African leadership in zero emissions transportation industry. So there's one thing that I started working on earlier this year, and I was fortunate enough to work with some companies within the European Union under Horizon 2020. And I then started modeling something. And this thing that I was modeling is called SSMTS, which is Sustainable Smart Mobility Transport System. So SSMTS will design, create, test, and evaluate tools resulting in a scientifically tested toolbox for increasing electric mobility in urban areas of developing and emerging economies. These tools are categorized as methods, applications, and strategies. So meaning we want to get there, not right and then not know when we're going to get there. So these will be developed for improving operations, i.e. smarter processes and utilization of resources, leading to better service, quality, and/or lower costs. Service value, which is stakeholder and value propositions, and governance, which is policy recommendations and public authority planning. Because there's a whole ecosystem that we have to consider, which could either be seen as top-down, bottom-up, but everyone at the end of the day has to work with each other. And then, as well, we need to have demonstrations of the SSMTS, which is a two-way communications with both practice and applied research. So one is that the demonstrations selected for the project reflect the priority and the urgency for change in the market, as well as the difficulty and challenge that the service providers face. So we need to understand the problems from its core. Now, the fortunate part is that we understand things inside out and not outside in. So why do most strategies that are brought outside in fail? Is because they don't understand it the best way that we do. And secondly, the demonstrations are twofold. So with electric urban mobility operations, services, and governance, and tools, testing, and evaluation, the design, execution, and evaluation will proceed according to a living lab methodology. Another great extract that I took from the reading that I read once is that proactive policy is necessary to drive the EV transition in a particular direction. Left to the market, the benefits and the costs of an inevitable transition would not be equitable, A coherent policy framework is needed. A liquid fuels transition plan in Africa is no excuse, which is where we always find ourselves, going back to what? Liquid fuels. So what do I want you all to do? Number one is to combine solutions in creative ways, in creative new ways, with the aim of maximize utilization. Two is to partner up with unexpected friends and work together. Three is to minimize waste by using efficient vehicles that is tailored for a designated job. So with that particular point, it's like we've got two types of vehicles. One is the ZB RS, one is the ZB Cargo. The Cargo is pretty much built for deliveries and for road maintenance. Does it still make sense for us to use a one-ton bakkie to do a small job on the road? Or can we optimize and actually have less tools to still fulfill the same job at a much quicker pace? And obviously saving us budget on our fiscus. And as well, we need to act now. Don't wait for flying robot taxis or an underground hyperloop tunnels. That is a far-fetched dream for us as Africa. We need to be very realistic. And the missing link is closer than you think.
So you guys are all in the private space, sort of looking to see what you can do in terms of influencing the private sector to adopt EVs. If you were to identify one thing that would allow people to touch and feel the technology more so that it can get greater mass adoption, what would be that one thing that you feel like is sort of the thing that would take it over?
So if you really want to see something being rolled out and implemented, just go ahead and do it. So I'll speak for myself as well with my vehicles. What I've done was that I've literally put into as many people's faces as possible so they can understand it. And like sometimes you just have to keep it simple.
My question is, I heard you talking about refurbishing taxi or public transport into using EVs. So my question is, how realistic is it to do that? If it is realistic, how are you gonna take the taxi drivers and make them to agree to give you a chance to take their taxis to change them into EVs? Bear in mind that taxi drivers take about 80% of the workers in Gauteng. So the transition, how are you gonna, on what time are you gonna do that, if it's possible to do that?
I actually love your question. It's like the perfect question that a lot of people don't get. You take international frameworks and you try to localize them without understanding how a basic thing like the taxi association works. You need to understand that, especially with the taxi association, I'm just like discussing this thing as in a broad sense, is that with the taxi association, you first have to try identify who runs it. So there's SA Taxi, there's Taxi Choice, there's Santaco, there is APSA as well, and then now there's also Standard Bank. So with that, I personally feel, because I've engaged excessively with Santaco, some people within Santaco, some people within SAMTA, is that you need to create a consortium for them. These guys are used to a traditional way of doing things. So for them, it's not about getting into a vehicle and it feels great that I'm driving it, is its practical sense. Does it make sense for my business? So as much as we can engage and talk about all the technology that's out there, it's what are we creating for ourselves here? I personally feel that we need to create a consortium of sorts for them, because at the end of the day, if you're going to try and compete with and get into a taxi association, unfortunately you will become a moving target. And then how do you avoid that? The best way to avoid it is to create an inclusive framework for these guys within Santaco, SA Taxi, Taxi Choice, APSA, Standard Bank, and the like, to form part of this conglomerate that will then obviously start ushering in new forms of vehicles, which obviously from an electrical perspective, it's called electric freight vehicles. So how do we then start introducing those EFVs for them? As much as we can talk about the greatness of the engineering, is most importantly is understanding their business model. So I hope I've answered you in terms of how we can do it. It's making friends with strangers.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Mohau. I'm a final year student at UJ. My first question comes from the first speaker. I was kind of late, but maybe you can answer these questions. I don't know if they were discussed. Regarding the green scooter, right? In terms of, because I love numbers, purchase-wise, how much are we speaking about in terms of purchase, maintenance, durability, full charge? What is the distance that can be covered with full charge? The licensing behind the user, do they have to have a specific license, or they can have a motorcycle license? And the last question is, I didn't see like doors, right? So for instance, if we were to have, like if I were to be driving it and driving some passengers and it rained, for instance, how will they be protected from that?
Our vehicles, they'll be costing about around roughly 90,000 rand once we probably commercially launch last year. I mean, launch probably next year. I think you asked me about the sails, the doors. Is that we actually use sails? So if you've seen me around Auckland Park or wherever, I normally drive with them off because mostly people want to see how they look inside. Did you ask me about distance? Yeah, I think you asked me about this. So from a single charge, our vehicles give you, there's like 4 different variations of them. So the current ones that are outside, one's downstairs. Our cargo gives you about 85 kilometers from a single charge, which has a 4 kilowatt battery, two kilowatt batteries on each motor. And then the RS, which is the passenger version, that gives you about 72.8 to about 78 kilometers from a single charge, which takes about roughly 3.5 to 4 hours. What we actually do offer is that either option A, you can charge from your normal plug point at home using a Shuko plug, like literally you just plug it in for about 4 hours, or you can use the quick charger, which we're looking to launch as well at some point. And then lastly, there's battery swapping. So that's another thing that we're also looking at introducing, which is battery swapping, because it's also like it's more convenient in terms of what you're trying to do. You asked me about cost of something, cost of service, maintenance. So what I was fortunate enough to do late last year, early this year, was work with McDonald's South Africa, and trying to create this new ecosystem for e-services, which is food delivery. And we designed this entire P&L, and servicing. And what worked out was that I think it would cost about 50 rand a month in terms of your wear and tear of the vehicle. Obviously, from an actual cost perspective, we're still not there because we still have to learn so much about our vehicles within this climate so that we can actually give realistic numbers. I hope I've answered you.
Please help me in giving the panel of speakers a warm thank you by giving them a round of applause. Thank you.